September 28th, 1972. It's Game 8 of hockey's Summit Series. The best of Canada against the best of the Soviet Union. After 7 games, each side has 3 wins and a tie. In Canada, the entire country is virtually shut down. The nation's cultural identity on the line. As the Soviets pull ahead after 2 periods, 5-3, frustration mounts. During the intermission, the goaltender Ken Dryden says to himself, "In 20 minutes, I will be the most hated man in Canada."
It was the ultimate test of the 2 hockey superpowers.
Those guys were playing with passion. Everybody knew that it's a war.
Now they're pointing at each other back to the net. He is totally incensed at this call.
2 hostile economic and political systems, capitalism versus communism.
We're not going to lose. No way we're going to lose.
This was for the prestige of the country. We are the world champions.
I was like a man possessed.
Really the hardest fought game I think I've seen in years. None of that ice is just sheer war. These 2 teams are going at it. They're not
The Cold War, the us against them attitude was exactly what this turned out to be.
For 4 long decades, from the end of World War II to the crumbling of the Berlin Wall, ideological differences and military muscle threatened the very existence of the modern world.
At this moment, the missile force of the United States begins to get ready to hurl its thermonuclear warheads at targets halfway across the world.
The United States and the world's other great superpower, the Soviet Union, engaged in a real and terrifying Cold War that reached the entire free world and communist bloc.
He tells the delegates the sun of communism is rising. Our forces have never been so powerful.
In time, even technological achievements like sending the first man into space took on dramatic overtones. Success in sport was especially important to the Soviets. They viewed winning as an affirmation of the communist system. And their triumphs frustrated not only the United States, but other Western countries as well. Especially one country obsessed with one sport. Hockey is Canada's game. It's played from coast to coast, in small towns and big cities, on ponds and rivers and rinks, both indoors and out. The history and heritage of the game is ingrained in the culture, and success on the ice is expected. In the first 7 Olympics, the Canadians won 6 gold medals. But starting in 1956, the Soviet Union began to dominate the game on the world stage. Year after year, tournament after tournament, the subsidized amateurs of the Soviet national team beat on the Canadians like a maddening drum. And by 1972, after winning their 3rd consecutive Olympic gold medal, the Soviets were eager to prove just how good they really were.
The first glimmer of a possibility of a Canada-Soviet hockey series really came in a strange way. There was a little clue embedded in a column by a sports columnist in Pravda. the official organ of the Soviet Union and the Communist Party. And one of the young officers at the Canadian Embassy in Moscow had the job of reading the Russian papers, and he came across this suggestion that perhaps the Soviet national hockey team needed a new challenge. They had won 10 World Championships in a row. There was no longer any challenge for them in Europe, and perhaps it was time that they faced the famous professionals of the National Hockey League. This Canadian diplomat realized that there'd never be something like this in the paper in Moscow unless there was an official sanction for it. So he went to see the columnist in question.
So they had some vodka and they talked about it, and that was where the idea was born, to have a series of Canada's best versus the Soviet best. And to demonstrate what Canada's best was like, he actually showed footage of the 1971 Stanley Cup Finals. And oddly enough, that turned out to be hugely popular in the Soviet Union. Millions of people saw it, the army distributed it. It just sort of snowballed.
With government on both sides willing to facilitate a series, then it was just a matter of the NHL to let its players be available for a series of so-called friendly matches. That's how they were referred to, exhibition games. You know, nothing at stake, no trophy, no championship, except that everybody knew that it was going to be the ultimate test of the two hockey superpowers. Canadians shared the American view to a great extent, that the Soviet Union was the enemy. The superpower that had the missiles pointed straight at our cities. We just saw them as that kind of scary place where they paraded their missiles through Red Square on May Day every year, and that was a suggestion that they were out to get us.
The Politburo asked us to guarantee a good result. This was for the prestige of the country. We are the Olympic champions. We are the world champions.
Hockey was the face that Canada wished the world to see. The world's going to pay total attention to us because this is the second most important country in the world we're playing, and we're going to smoke them. So there really was our equivalent of the moon landing.
These were not only hockey matches, but also a meeting of two opposite systems. And of course, it was apparent that everything had to be settled.
This series was going to be a capitalism versus communism. It really was the free world trying to prove that its way of doing things, as expressed in how it played hockey, was superior to the Marxist system of command and control. And the Soviet people and government were just as interested in proving the opposite, that their system was in fact superior, as proven by the prowess of their hockey team. So they were both entering on quite an unknown adventure that took on this enormous symbolic significance that was far beyond an athletic contest.
The structure of the Summit Series was simple. 8 games, 4 in each country, played in September of 1972 prior to the NHL season. The Canadian team, 35 of the country's best professional players, was assembled by Alan Eagleson, a bombastic lawyer from Toronto who represented many of the game's greatest stars. Recognizable names familiar to fans both north and south of the border. Fil Espozito and his brother Tony, Bobby Clark, Ken Dryden, Pete Mahavlich, Rod Gilbert. Even without Bobby Orr, who was injured, or superstar Bobby Hull, who had left the NHL for the fledgling World Hockey Association, the firepower on the team was undeniable and unprecedented. The preparation, however, was altogether different.
I had been working for a company in upstate New York who had just filed for bankruptcy, and I found myself out of a job. I got a call a day or two later from Alan Eagleson. He asked if I would be interested in being the GM coach of the team, and I certainly was. There was no place else for me to go at that time.
I was in Flin Flon in the summer, and Al Eagleson called me and asked if I'd like to join Team Canada. And I said, yes, I sure would, and tell me where to be and what time to get there. It was certainly an honor to wear the Canadian jersey, but it was also supposed to be a bit of a vacation almost.
In those days, we didn't do anything. I mean, the season would be finished probably the first part of May or April, and we didn't put on the skates up until September.
Camp would be 6 weeks, and during that training camp period, you would then get into shape or get as close to getting into shape as possible for your NHL season. So for us, with the series starting September the 2nd, we didn't have very much time to prepare.
I really thought it was going to be like an all-star game, and we were going to have some laughs and fun. The training camp was a joke. We didn't really train hard. We really didn't. I didn't. I made jokes about saying that the closest to the ice I got was the ice in my vodka. But I can tell you this, we had a good time. We really did.
It was supposed to be a cakewalk for Canada.
Gosh, how good can they be? I mean, we have so many skilled players on our team. I mean, it won't take very long, maybe, 2-3 days, and then, we'll be in shape.
And we're going to make a beautiful team, and we're going to just roll past them and beat them badly.
I really felt that we would overwhelm them.
The Canadian attitude was bordering on smugness and certainly arrogance before the series began. You're operating here in the arena of national myth. We had invented hockey, and we had the best players in the world. We had no equal. Everyone thought it was high time that we put those Ruskies in their place, because they were going around calling themselves world champions.
In the summer of 1972, when they told us that an agreement was reached to play the series, I personally didn't feel all that much hype. Okay, they've agreed. Okay, we'll play. We were already with our clubs preparing for the Soviet Championship. It wasn't like, oh my, we have to go in the early fall and play the professionals. No, it was the normal process of preparation. We were assembled 2 weeks before the start of the series, in mid-August, for a centralized type of camp, and started to prepare together.
I mean, we didn't care about them. We had so much firepower. It really didn't matter what they put out there. Yeah, I knew they were good hockey players, but we were going to be so much better. We are the best in the world, and how are they going to beat the best in the world?
But what's strange, before this series, there were no pep talks from the bosses, even the sports bosses. They treated us very gingerly and with some fear. Maybe they were afraid we were really going to lose all 8 games, like the Canadians said we would, and all would be blowouts.
The predictions in the media were quite outlandish. Many so-called hockey experts were predicting a clean sweep.
The headlines were, 8-0 for Canada. Dick Beddoes, the great writer in Toronto, said if the Soviets win 1 game, he would take his column, dip it in borscht, and eat it on front steps of City Hall in Toronto. But there was no chance. Everybody, 8-0, maybe 7-1.
People were relishing the prospect of trouncing the Soviets, of absolutely whipping them and showing them who was best. But at the same time, there was an air of mystery. The Soviet Union was this other planet, and so when these players arrived and they skated out on the ice of the Canadian Forum, they had funny-looking, tight-fitting small helmets, red helmets that they wore that bore a strange resemblance to the cosmonauts' headgear. There was a real sense of mystery about who they were, and it was going to be a great entertainment.
On September 2nd, 1972, in front of a welcoming and confident Canadian crowd, the Summit Series opened at the home of hockey, the Forum in Montreal.
Boy, this is going to be fun. You know, Pierre Trudeau got out there, and I remember him dropping the puck, and I whooped it back, and I went, hey, I won the face-off.
There's the official face-off.
And I don't know who took the face-off against me. I have no idea whether it was Mihайлов, ugliness. Boris Mihайлов, you know, he has to sneak up on a glass of water to drink it. That's how ugly this guy is.
Пускай меня не любят.
I could care less about that. They didn't have to like me. I was doing my job.
I didn't care. And I was joking around. I was having a good time. I really was.
Halfway around the world, the sense of anticipation was just as real.
When the series started, it was, you know, in September of 1972. I watched it on a small, tiny black and white TV in our kitchen. Then they started to introduce the players, and they introduced Team Russia. It was like really polite cheers, you know, it was really quiet. And then they started to introduce Team Canada. And you know what? I thought it was like an earthquake. And then they started to name these players, Fil Espozito, and then just, it was really crazy. It's like watching a cartoon or something. They greeted these players as if they were like, I don't know, superheroes or something. And all of them were chewing gum, which was totally taboo by Russian standards. That's like drinking booze in the subway or something. You don't chew gum in public. And here you see these guys, which are totally open and chew their gum, smile, and think that they're kings of the world.
For the start, and the face-off, and the game is underway with Petrov having cleared it into the Canadian zone. There's the pass from Lino. Big stop. Here's a shot right in front of it. Score!
When Team Canada scored, like I think it was like 30 seconds in the game, it was 1-0. It just like, and everybody thought that's it.
And after 30 seconds, scored a first goal. I said, oh man, we're gonna have a good time here.
Back to Henderson. Henderson fired it home.
The first 5 minutes, we're up 2-0. Oh, this is going to be fun. This is going to be very easy.
Well, the beginning of the game made us disheartened and discouraged us. I personally thought that was it. To make things worse, the organ plays the funeral march.
I'm thinking to myself, maybe we should just take it easy. We don't want to embarrass anybody here, you know? Let's just put on a good show. Let's put on a good show. Boy.
We thought it's over, you know, just like it's nothing. And then the miracle happened.
Vladiev trying to clear to the corner. It's center right in front. It's score! Back to Mihайлов, right in the clear. Oh, right in. It's score!
1 goal, 2 goals, beautiful. And then, of course, you know, the whole house was like yelling, yes, 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 yes.
We did start playing our game, and we were successful. The Canadians couldn't keep up with us.
Varlamov goes down over the line, cutting in around Laurie. A shot, he scores! Varlamov went right around the Canadian defense, Laurie.
Karlov, he scored this beautiful goal, which made the Team Canada NHL defensemen looked like they were a bunch of old-timers, you know, playing hockey, because he was doing with them whatever he wanted to.
Varlamov, a very tricky player, he scores! Varlamov let a bullet drive go, and a deep drive to the top left-hand corner.
Valery Karlamov scored 2 goals back-to-back in that game that were both individual rushes. I mean, they were worthy of, you know, the Montreal Canadiens at their best, you know, a Maurice Richard or a Jean Beliveau. So it quickly became clear that the stereotype of this rigid, robotic style of play was quite wrong.
All of a sudden, you know, I'm watching this. I had never seen so many good players on one team.
Valery Harlamov, who was number 17, could skate faster than anybody on the ice. He had greater balance than anybody on the ice. He had a great shot, and it was impossible for the Canadians to keep up with him. And Boris Mihайлov was the same way. He's a craggy, crusty-faced old Soviet player. Yakушев, he was as pure a hockey player as you could ever imagine. He had everything, every skill you'd ever want to see in a great hockey player.
Shadron, a roller right in front. They score! Yakушев cutting right in front.
It was a moving style of play. They never really stood still. Their players were moving all the time. It was kind of confusing for us.
Lino comes right back for the Soviet. Passes to Mihайлов, coming in on goal. Oh, he scores!
We look at each other like, what is going on out there?
We were not prepared for this, and they just kept coming.
By the middle of the first period, everything was in its proper place. We were outplaying them and showing them the kind of hockey they had never seen in their lives. I am 100% sure of that.
And their transition game was unnerving. I mean, we would go down, and before we knew it, they were going the other way twice as fast.
They're closing in. Seaman gets right in, he scores!
We had exhausted ourselves to the level physically that we couldn't even understand the different game that they were presenting us.
Team Canada right now, they've given it their best, and they aren't good enough tonight to beat the Soviets. As simple as that.
The trouble was they underestimated their opponent. Let's say, if I can make a comparison here, the Miracle of Ice. That was the opposite situation when Team Russia actually underestimated this bunch of students from the United States. So it was almost the same situation, but reverse.
It was demoralized us, and we were embarrassed.
They got humiliated in the first game. They lost to these guys. No one doesn't even know their names. All those guys, you know. It was unbelievable, unthinkable.
And the USSR have defeated Canada by a score of 7-3.
We won 7-3, but could have scored at least 5 more goals. No doubt. No doubt.
In the end, they didn't even shake hands with Russians. It's like, you know, in Russia, it's a tradition. When you're done with the game, the players shaking their hands and then go to their locker rooms. But in this case, Canada just left. Just animals. The laws, they don't even have enough dignity and, you know, just like to say thank you, you know, for the beautiful game.
The sense of shock that set in right across Canada from coast to coast was profound.
We were tremendously disappointed. Even my brother, after the first game, he comes up to me, he says, "What happened?" I says, "Listen, I bought you a ticket to see the game. Didn't you watch it? You see how good they are?" He says, "Well, I want you to know you're a disgrace to your country."
These total aliens could come over and lick our best professionals. It was just a disillusioning moment. People saw right away that, you know, we're in a fight here. We're in a war that's not going to be so easy to win.
The morning after the huge Soviet victory and huge or even Canadian defeat, I was on the turbo train going between Montreal and Toronto, and I was sitting next to Alan Eagleson, the Players Association head who had put this game together. Who walks down the aisle but Murray Dryden, the goalie's father, Ken Dryden's father. Murray Dryden is this avuncular, big guy, very charitable figure. He looks at Eagleson and he yells at him, "You suckered us." And Eagleson jumps up, gets over me, climbs over me, and gets face to face with Ken Dryden's father. And Dryden's father is yelling at him, "You told us these guys weren't very good." Here was a guy whose son was embarrassed in a 7-goal debacle. If these two intelligent guys could come to this, what about the average Canadian? And I realized the impact that this thing had on this whole country.
Dryden certainly wasn't the only humiliated Canadian after Game 1. As promised, the legendary hockey writer Dick Beddoes, who predicted that Canada would sweep the series, soaked his column in borscht and promptly ate his words. Like most everyone else, he was surprised to learn just how good the Soviets were, especially their goaltender.
Wladysław Tretьяк, who was the goalie of Team USSR, who was only 20 at this time. And if you really think about someone who was underestimated, it was Tretьяк. During the preparation for the series, Team Canada sent their scouts to Moscow to watch, what are these Russians? Who are they? Who are their stars? How are they playing?
On top of their regular scouting report that they would do on any team, we've asked them to specifically give us a report on the Russian power play and the method they use to kill penalties when they're shorthanded, and also to give us a pretty good book on their goaltenders.
They came back and, they're okay, and their forwards are okay, their defense are so-so, and they have a terrible goalie over there. But they didn't know one thing, that the game was played the day after Tretьяк got married.
Oh, I didn't even really want to play because of my wedding. So I had my head elsewhere, of course. Yes, they came to watch us, and I allowed 8 or 9 goals. They thought, we'll score as many as we want on him. That was the opinion they took home.
He was playing with a severe hangover. At least that was the excuse given by the Russians. Some Canadians began to wonder if maybe it hadn't been a deliberate attempt to sucker the scout into thinking that the goaltending was no good. But Tretьяк certainly was far, far better than anyone had expected. Also a very handsome young man whom a lot of Canadian females became very enamored of.
Here's a shot, and Tretьяк covered the angle beautifully.
Team Canada's lopsided loss in the first game clearly showed that its talented players were woefully out of game shape. And perhaps even worse, prisoners to an outdated system of organized hockey they had spent their whole lives perfecting.
Strange as it may sound, Canadians had never thought about their game. They just played it. And so that it was a game that was basically invented every time the puck dropped.
Go after your opponent. Play physical, play hard, try and get the puck, try and score goals.
They didn't ever consider that there might be entirely other ways of playing the game. And then you come up against 5-man units? No one had ever heard of anything like that. Rotating players where you have the forwards going back, taking the place along the blue line and looping around, cycling in corners. Never even heard of it, never imagined it.
In Russian hockey or European hockey, it's about being fast and smart. And it's about team play. It's about when people are trained together for a long, long time, they can play with each other with the blindfolded because they know where their partner is, they feel them. And one of the things that Soviet hockey contributed to the game of hockey was the methodology, training methodology, the selection of players. At the very early age, you go to auditions, you take your skates, you take your stick, and the best coaches are looking at you, looking at how well you're coordinated, your strength and flexibility. And at the very early age, you're being filtered by the coaches. And they select you, and then they kind of mentor you for many years.
The Soviet hockey system was almost created from scratch. They didn't play hockey until after the Second World War. The great architect of Soviet hockey was a man named Anatoly Tarasov, who was kind of a hockey intellectual. He watched film of NHL games, and he thought about, well, how could you design a better hockey player? You had to have super conditioning, strength training. Develop his skating skills, and all of those kind of fundamentals before you even got to the question of, handling the puck and shooting the puck. That could all come later, but first you had to build the bionic man.
Of course, there was a system. It was a system of training and everything. There was very little distance running, mainly barbells with weights and jumping exercises. We carried each other, crawled. With Tarasov, those things were done willingly by the guys, and they actually liked to do them. Like the exercise called Kill a Canadian. You needed to hit the boards at full speed, go down on one knee, get up, and hit the boards again. Yes, kill a Canadian. That's what they called it. Oh, jokingly, of course. The kind of training I had to endure, nobody else could. Even skaters were feeling sorry for me. You won't die a natural death, they said, because of the kind of workload I had to go through.
You didn't just play hockey all the time. You used other sports to develop eye-hand coordination and agility and speed. He equipped them with these rubber belts that weighed 25 pounds. He had them living in barracks-style environment. And he was able to control their lives so that they just lived and ate and breathed hockey.
I remember saying to my wife, I'm glad I'm not Harry Sindon, because I tell you what, there's got to be some changes. We knew that we had underestimated them, and okay, what do? Our game plan didn't work. And obviously, some players really struggled out there, and so we knew there was going to be changes in the lineup for sure.
The fact that they beat us up pretty good in the first game, no longer was this going to be a friendly series.
Harry told me, he said, Phil, I'm going to put you with JP, Parisi, and Wayne Cashman. I said, fine.
We had to play a different style against the Russian. We could not go skill versus skills at that time because we were not in shape to do this. So we had to play more like along the walls and stuff, keep the puck away from the middle of the ice.
Parisi jammed against the board.
All of a sudden, we're finishing each one of our checks, and we're playing the game with a lot more intensity than we had played before. We had to kind of rough it up a little more.
And there's a near mix-up there when they fought for that puck.
Team Canada's blue-collar approach to Game 2 was more like a typical National Hockey League game. The Soviets were unaccustomed to the rough physical play, and it unnerved them.
They were going to slow them down, and they're going to slow them down physically. There wasn't a lot of violence, but the Russians were surprised as the physicality. The Russians would complain about it because this is their baptism. Their frustration had built up enough so that their captain, Karlamov, came over to protest the best he could with the language barrier. He ended up, bumping me, and there's only one item that occurs then, and that's a misconduct.
Karlamov ran into the referee, and he'll likely get a misconduct.
The coach, as I remember, between that period, stormed into the room. There was an interpreter with him, had a whole list of grievances that he thought should have been addressed. Kicked a chair, I think it was, metal chairs, it wasn't very fancy, and then left. Actually didn't hear much from him after the rest of the game.
While the Soviets were unable to unleash an attack similar to Game 1, the Canadians took an early lead on a goal by Fil Esposito.
The pressure on my brother was far greater than the pressure on me. Boy, and you couldn't talk to him before the games. He'd sit there like this. And you go to talk to him, you go, get away from me.
I don't communicate. I prepare myself. It's not a fun preparation where guys are joking around, and I wasn't the most fun guy to be around, Slightly. That's how it was.
Out the right side, a shot. Oh, a nice save. Another shot. Who's coming in on goal? A shot. Oh, and another save. And again in front of it, Demon shoots. Another great save.
With Toни Espozito stopping all but one Soviet shot, Team Canada began to find a comfortable rhythm. And then iced the game midway through the third period on a spectacular individual effort by Peter Mahavlich.
I faked the shot well outside the blue line, and their defenseman got up on his tippy toes a little bit, and I made a little move and deked him and went in alone on Tretьяк and made a move and scored a backhanded goal to make it 3-1. It was a real momentum changer for us then, and Vladislav Tretьяk, who I've seen over the last few years, has said he still doesn't understand how I scored that goal.
And Canada has evened the series 4-1. And then Toni Espozito is being mobbed by his teammates. They all...
by Game 3, it was still an open question which Team Canada was going to show up that night, because the Team Canada from Game 1 had been soundly defeated. Team Canada in Game 2 had been much more aggressive, attacking with a lot more energy and drive. It was a kind of a 50-50 proposition at that point.
In Winnipeg for Game 3, Team Canada's energetic play continued. The Canadians jumped out to a 3-1 lead midway through the second period.
Esposito got a pass from the corner and fired it home to give Canada a 3-1 lead.
We started off well, and then as the game went on, it just seemed like we ran out of gas for some reason. That happens. Some nights you just don't have that, you know?
Bumping there on the side, Lebedev, 23. Here's a shot, and he scored!
The Soviets had this ability, which they showed in Game 3, to score in bunches.
Goal! He shoots, he scores! Harlamov.
They could explode very quickly for 2 or 3 goals in rapid succession.
Into the corner, it's passed in front, rolls loose. Here's another pass right in front. He shot to score! And they tied it up, Bodnov.
They tied it up. That really demoralized the Canadians.
After the disappointing tie in the third game, the Canadians still found reason to be encouraged. Since the humbling loss in Game 1, Team Canada's play had steadily improved. So as the series moved to Vancouver for the final game in Canada, Coach Harry Sindon thought he saw a solution to an uncomfortable situation.
When we invited these 35 players to join the team, we promised that they would get into at least 1 game each.
You've got 35 guys and only 17 can play. Well, you got 18 guys that are ticked off at all times because they want to be on the ice.
And we won the game in Toronto and tied the one in Winnipeg, and I felt that maybe I could fulfill this promise a little bit and inject some of the younger players into the lineup.
The coaching staff made some changes, put some other people in the lineup, and things did not go well right from the get-go.
Up the center to Petrov. Over the line, he stops. They're getting that passing player. Jenkins drive. Scores! Right wing, they're closing in. Every man is up now for the pass. Here's Lachenko getting his shot. He scores! And the Soviet have taken a 2-0 lead. The Soviet power play is devastating.
Their power play was good. It was really good. And we never practiced penalty killing. We were just going on our instincts. We didn't have time. We didn't have time to do all that.
They're watching their team thoroughly outclassed. I mean, this was as one-sided as you could ever imagine.
A perfect play by Blinoff.
And the performance of the Canadians was woeful.
People were angry, they were upset, they were furious at the players.
They're giving the goalies the Bronx cheers when they stop a soft shot.
Dryden caught that one with a little derision from the fans.
Then a tremendous sense of disillusionment sets in.
Going in, number 9 is knocked over by Goldsworthy, and he gives him the elbow again.
That's when you begin to get the booing from the stands.
The Canadian defense is not standing up, and the Soviet player is walking right into the slot. The crowd didn't seem to like the fact that Mahavlich was sitting on Tretьяк there for what seemed like 10 seconds.
And the fans were just, I mean, they just wouldn't let up. I mean, we were traitors at that point to the country.
There was one game that I didn't get to play in, and sitting up in the stands, I just couldn't believe some of the things that were yelled out at the players.
It was a very unsportsmanlike manifestation of this fear coming true, you know, the worst nightmare coming true. Maybe we're not the best after all. Maybe the Soviets, you know, do have a superior brand of hockey, and we've been kidding ourselves all these years, and the feeling of being betrayed, or hoodwinked, or fooled made people angry.
Well, it's one thing to have a crowd turn on you for the way your power play is not working or anything. It's entirely another thing to have this feeling that the country is ashamed of you. And I think that that's what the Vancouver crowd was expressing. And at that moment, I truly think this country was ashamed of its soldiers.
Harlamov turning, getting a backhand right foot, he scores! Nikolov from Harlamov. Nikolov.
We lost 5-3 there, and the booing was too much for me. And then they said that I was picked as star of the game from the Canadian side. And as I'm skating, they were screaming obscenities at me like you wouldn't believe. And saying the communists are better, why don't you admit it? This communism is better. What the I wanted to get my stick and throw it at them like a spear.
The people didn't realize how good the Soviet team was.
Then Johnny Esau started to ask me questions.
How good is both teams are?
With these guys yelling, I lost it.
For the people that boo us, geez, all of us guys are really disheartened and we're disillusioned and we're disappointed in some of the people. We cannot believe the bad press we've got, the booing we've gotten in our own buildings.
You know, the Americans have their great speeches from Gettysburg, and Kennedy's "Ask not what your country can do for you" speech, but our greatest speech was by a sweating hockey player in a rink in Vancouver.
I'm really disappointed. I am completely disappointed. I cannot believe it. Some of our guys are really, really down in the dumps. We know, we're trying. What the hell? I mean, we're doing the best we can. Us guys, 35 guys that came out and played for Team Canada, we did it because we love our country and not for any other reason. No other reason. They can throw the money for the pension fund out the window. They can throw anything they want out the window. We came because we love Canada.
I wasn't there for the players. I wasn't there for the league. I wasn't there for that. I was there for the country.
Phil, I'm sure that the people can see from these sweat just pouring off your face that you and all your players have given 100%, and we look forward to some great games from you and the rest of your gang when you get over to Moscow, and we can wish you the very best of luck.
John,
keep working hard.
We're going to get better. I know.
Attaboy. Thank you very much, Phil.
I don't think everybody likes to hear it, but at this point, we started to play for ourselves and our team and not Canada. And we left Canada after that game feeling that way. They had turned on us, and I can understand why. And if I had been a fan watching that series, I probably would have felt the same way. But they had turned against us, and we felt we weren't going to get them back by discussing it.
We got out of Dodge, so to speak. We left not town, we left the country. We ended up going over to Sweden.
The trip to Sweden was built into the schedule as a break between the 4 games in Canada and the 4 in Moscow. It was supposed to be 10 days of relaxation, with 2 games sprinkled in against the lightly regarded Swedish national team.
Oh, it was tremendous. It was just tremendous. Plus, we played in an Olympic-sized rink. That was a totally different thing, you know. It's wider and more room behind the net, and it was so important, you know. And then again, more conditioning, more ice time. It's another week.
But when the game started, the trip turned out to be anything but a holiday.
We didn't know going in how good the Swedish players were. But they were just as good as the Russians. Thank heavens they were, because we didn't need weak opposition. We needed tough opposition, and we got that. That's what our team needed. And it was physical, it was dirty, it was the way we were going to have to play in Russia.
We played the Swedes 2 exhibition games, and it was a bloodbath. It really was. Wayne Cashman got one of the worst injuries I've ever seen. And one of these idiot Swedes filed their stick down and stuck him in the mouth, cut his tongue wide open. Couldn't play. Cash came on the trip anyway. He's quite a trooper, man. And we used to bug him. I'd go up and say, "How you doing?" And he'd go, because he couldn't talk. His tongue was swollen. Couldn't eat. He had to drink through the straw, and we busted him. I would get him milkshakes.
Cashman's horrific injury required 50 stitches and kept him from playing any of the 4 games in Moscow. But for the rest of Team Canada, the break served a purpose both on and off the ice.
It was going to be a wonderful experience, going to be able to play with the Espositos, the Cornwayes, Savards, Lapointe back there. The other side of the coin is anybody that kept you from the Stanley Cup, you didn't like them. And you had to bump heads with them all the time.
They were your rivals, and a few of the guys you really didn't like, you know. We weren't a team. We were just a bunch of guys thrown together. So we went over there, and that's when we really gelled. And we didn't have any pressure on us because we're isolated. We're in the middle of Stockholm.
Guy Lapointe's wife, I believe, gave birth. And we got a couple of cases of beer, went right across from the Grand Hotel at this park. Everybody was there. Even Dryden came. And Kenny didn't hang with the guys too often, but even he was there.
And all of a sudden, we're getting a lot closer than we were the first couple of games.
And I think right there we became a team because the next day at practice, Eagleson said to us, the Russians are trying to change the deal. They wanted no wives can come over, no girlfriends can come over. And I stood up and I said, Harry and Fergie, y'all, get out, please. Leave us alone for a while. I stood up there and I said, guys, we can tell them to stick it in their ass and we're going back home unless they live up to the deal. Or we can say, fine, let's go over there and play. My personal point of view is, you make a deal, you stick by the damn deal. You stick by it, you don't change it in midstream. So we should go, but they better stick to the deal.
When the Soviets backed off their demands, the series moved forward, with Team Canada determined to restore its pride on the ice.
We ended the week in Sweden with two of the toughest workouts I've ever put a team through. If they had eaten and drank too much while they were in Sweden, I was going to get it out in one day. But we did prepare ourselves to go to Moscow.
Well, we went to Moscow, and back then you were behind the Iron Curtain. There were guys on the tarmac with machine guns back then. People are walking around, nobody smiles. So it was depressing.
We felt that we were being watched all the time. You know, we couldn't go anywhere without having KGB watching us.
The general public were really, really nice people, but they were under severe surveillance or whatever. I was on the bus, and we had taken a bunch of gum and candy bars and a whole bunch of stuff with us to give to those little kids. So I'm outside in the bus, and some of this little kid, you know, they say, goom, goom, goom. You know, so I threw a pack of gum with them, you know, and then there's one of those KGBs or one of those guys comes over, and as the little kid is picking up, you know, kicks his foot and stuff, and he picks up the gum, you know, and they're like, oh my God, you know. So in my arrogance, I went outside and I found a little boy, and I gave him a pack of gum, and I put in his hand and says, go.
People didn't have blue jeans. They had these gray burlap type pants. They loved blue jeans. They wanted to buy your blue jeans all the time.
And at that time, it was 1970s. People were wearing the bell-bottom pants. We didn't have those. We couldn't find this. We couldn't buy it because very few people traveled abroad. But now, when I looked at the pictures of the Team Canada in Moscow, I got a smile on my face because it reminds me of these days.
A lot of people have seen in the Canadian-Soviet hockey series something much deeper than a game of shinny. To them, the whole thing has been a clash of cultures. What, for example, would the highly disciplined citizen of the Soviet Union make of Phil Espozito, who by any measurement is very much his own man?
And all of a sudden, there's like, you know, aliens in town.
This is Game 5 of the Canada-Soviet series from Moscow.
The fans that were at the games in Moscow, those were all Russian elite. All the tickets were sold to people that are very connected, very influential, movie stars, singers, top-notch doctors, professors in college. Those were not street folks. You couldn't buy the tickets to, you know, to see the game. Like the regular folks had to watch it over TV.
Unlike in Canada, all 4 games in the Soviet Union were played in Moscow at the Luzhniki Ice Palace, where Game 5 got off to a somewhat comical start.
They'll each present each member of both teams with a small bouquet of flowers.
Little girls came out and handed us flowers. and a pedal or something must have fallen.
Седьмой номер. Фил Эспозито.
And number 7, Fil Esposito. And I skated and I hit the pedal or the flower or whatever it was and went, oop, boom. Landed right on my keister with my legs like this.
This is funny. I mean, he was laughing because it's just like, can you imagine, this is like introduction of the team. It's such an important event, all of these big names and whatever, and all of a sudden he just skates and falls down.
If I'd have done that, I would have been so embarrassed, I probably would have, hung my head and tried to get back into line. But that's who Espo was. Made a big deal of it. Threw out his arms like this and ta-da, ta-da.
And I give it the bow, and when I looked up, I made perfect eye contact with Brezhnev. You know, the guy with the eyebrows out to here? I mean, I made perfect contact and I went. And the guy next to him started to laugh. And Brezhnev going, the guy stopped. And I never forgot that.
Well, let's hope that's not the story of our trip to Moscow.
When we were going back to Moscow, we thought, on the big ice, these guys are just going to croak.
The big ice surface, we had to get used to that. John Ferguson came to me before the first game in Moscow, and he come up to me and just nobody else around, and he says, Paul, he says, we need your line to do well. Clark, Ellis, and I really believe we were the best line.
The right combination of three guys. Ellis was a diligent, positional player, and I was just a guy in the middle who chased the puck around.
And the pass to Clark, right in front, he scores! Clark!
And Henderson was speed. Lots of speed if there was any open ice.
And so with the bigger ice surface, I was really anticipative of that. This is going to be good for my game. When I get open, they're going to be able to get me the puck, and with my speed, hopefully I'm going to be able to burn them a little bit.
Recovered by Canada. Clark makes a long pass to Henderson. He's in the clear, right in the goal.
Paul Henderson's third goal of the series, midway through the second period, followed goals by J.P. Parisi and Bobby Clark to give Team Canada a 3-0 lead in Game 5. But the Soviets stormed back, scoring 4 goals in a 5-minute span midway through the third period to win the game, 5-4.
Game is over. And the Soviets made a tremendous comeback in that last period.
With the loss, there was no longer any margin of error for the Canadians. To win the series, they would have to take the remaining 3 games in Moscow. And it didn't help that they were completely paranoid of the entire Soviet experience.
Strange things were happening, for sure. They were pretty spooked about being in the land of the enemy.
It was Cold War time, and Frank Mahovlich had a legitimate concern about going to Russia. His parents were from Croatia, which was not treated very well by the Russians. He had some strong ill feelings towards them. He was a bit paranoid over the whole situation. We were all standing out on the street, along with the guests in the hotel, while they investigated a bomb scare. And when he heard that there was a bomb scare, he certainly thought the Russians were the ones that had planted the bomb. And he said, I told you so. I told you so. We got to be concerned about this team.
Well, I remember going to the rink and having scheduled a 1-hour workout and being on the ice like for about 30 minutes, 35 minutes. And I remember them turning the lights off. That's it. You're done.
Sometimes telephones would ring in the middle of the night in the players' hotel rooms. And they would pick up the phone and there'd be nobody there.
Phone calls would come at 3 in the morning. I remember pulling the phone out of the wall and they came and fixed it. If I pull it out of the wall, it means I don't want to be disturbed.
They began to feel that the Soviet team was using this kind of tactic to throw them off.
almost like James Bond-like stories, you know. They didn't want to live in the hotel because they were afraid that the rooms are bugged. The Russians through the KGB will find out their game plan.
We found microphones. We did. We found microphones behind the mirrors and the beds. There isn't a guy in our team that'll tell you that they didn't have the microphones.
One of the players looked under one of the carpets and found what he said was a microphone.
And he like unscrewed some of these bugs from the floor.
And it was attached to a chandelier in the room down below. And down went the chandelier. We had taken our own food and had it shipped in from Finland.
We brought over 350 cases of beer, 350 cases of soda, 350 cases of milk, and 350 steaks. When we got there, everything was in half. And the only thing we were really angry about is they stole our beer. We had to drink vodka, homemade vodka. You ever taste homemade vodka? Go in your garage, get turpentine, and drink it. Holy cripe, is it bad. Oh.
Soviets moving into a commanding lead in this series, having won 3, tied 1, and lost 1. This 6th game is a must for Canada if they're to win or tie the 8-game series.
If we don't win the last 3 games, we're going to be known as losers for the rest of our lives.
Так получилось, что мы приехали из Канады 5-3 по очкам вели, да? И тут пятый...
The games were 2-1 and 1 in our favor coming back from Canada. After Game 5, it was 3-1 and 1, and we needed to win just 1 of the 3 remaining games to claim the series. So, I think both the guys and the coaches were already thinking the series was won. But we forgot to account for the fact that Canadians always fight to the last second.
With its back against the wall, Team Canada returned to a more physical style of play in the next 2 games, starting with a vicious moment midway through the second period of Game 6.
I'll still never forget the image. I'm looking down at the ice, and there's Harlamov skating up the ice, and Bobby Clark is about 3 strides behind him. And you can see Bobby Clark here in Game 6 saying to himself, there's Harlamov. We're losing this series because of him. Bobby Clark gripped his hockey stick like a golf club, whipped him right in the ankle, broke his ankle. But guess what, folks? The series changed.
I believe on this one,
I don't think he meant at that time that he was going to break the guy's ankle or anything like that, but certainly Harlamov was going to go down one way or the other.
Of course I think it was intentional. Valeri was the brightest spot on our team, and I think the Canadian coaches instructed to get him off the ice by any means. And Clark, unfortunately, was successful in doing that.
Well, I got to pull Sergeant Schultz on this one. I didn't know it happened. I didn't see it happen. I didn't know anything about it. The story went that Bobby went out under instructions from someone. It certainly didn't come from me, and I don't think it came from John Ferguson, my assistant.
He never told me to do that. I did it on my own. Chased him down the ice and whacked him.
Tempers are flaring at every opportunity.
That's the way Clarkie played the game. And I would say probably in that team, he was the only guy that would go out there and do something like that. But he would have done that for the Philadelphia Flyers. That's who he was, and so he wasn't out of character. Clarkie was so competitive, he'd push his grandmother down the steps to win a hockey game.
As I've often said, it was an awful thing to do, but it sure felt good.
Well, the only thing I regret about that is that he didn't do it in the first game. Are you kidding me? That's part of the game. That's part of the game. And I have no problem with it. None. You understand this was war.
The 6 and 7, they were nasty games.
When Canadians are losing, they start gooning it up.
They're commies now. They're not only Russians, now they're commies.
What we encountered, we weren't quite used to it, even though we were warned that the Canadians play tough. I would hit them in the ribs. What did they expect? That was my way to pay them back.
There were some players on that team that you could really hate.
It's all extra motivation for us.
Down on that ice, it's just sheer war. These two teams are going at it. They're not sparing the lumber. They're not sparing the body.
Now it was really our system against their system and stuff, you know, and it became a personal.
He felt that Mikhailov had given him a dirty check, and so he began punching Mikhailov, who then began kicking at him with his skate and ended up drawing blood from Bergman's leg. That was an amazing moment. Players on both sides just lost it.
I was pushed, and I pushed back. So what? Phil says that I was the most unbearable player. So what? I can't stand him either.
Bergman is really red hot, as you notice.
When something happens and it's not what the Canadians want, they're unhappy with everything. It's their way. And they constantly grumble.
You look at the Fil Espozito, who was showing all of this. He was so animated. He was showing all of these gestures. He was so articulated. His face was like a gummy bear. No weapons involved, no shooting at each other, but everybody knew that it's a war.
They were challenging us as a people and certainly as a hockey empire.
The Cold War, the us against them attitude was exactly what this turned out to be.
I would have killed those son of a bitches to win. It scares me every time I think about it.
Out of this furious battle came two tremendously exciting, incredibly hard-fought games that each ended with Canada winning by a single goal. Both scored by the unheralded Paul Henderson. Henderson's first game winner came in the second period of Game 6, although he probably shouldn't have played at all after suffering a head injury late in Game 5.
I was knocked out. I was knocked out. If I hadn't had a helmet on, it probably would have been dead.
Now up on his feet, Dr. Jim Murray.
Jim Murray, who is the doctor in the team, they examined me, and obviously I had a pounding headache. And he said, Paul, you got a slight concussion. You cannot play. I actually started to cry. I said, Harry, don't do this to me. I said, I want to play. I said, I will be careful. I said, I will be careful. I'll take care of myself, but please, please don't take me out of the lineup. And Harry said, well, if you want to play, I'm not going to stop you.
Henderson's second game winner came near the end of Game 7. A remarkable effort that gave Team Canada a series-saving 4-3 win.
And I think I scored the greatest goal of my life. Went through the whole team and scored with about 2.5 minutes left in the game.
Henderson makes a beautiful move on this goal. This is an absolutely beautiful move by Henderson.
And that, to me, was the most satisfying goal I've ever scored in my life. In fact, after the game, I said to my wife, I can die a happy man because I will probably never score a bigger goal in my life.
On the eve of the final game in Moscow, Team Canada might have been far from home, but it certainly wasn't alone. Nearly 3,000 Canadian fans had come to the Soviet Union to follow their team.
Ticket prices for a package to go costs in the mid $600 range for a plane ticket,
I've had this for 5,000 miles.
hotel, and for the game tickets, which, you know, by today's standards is a huge bargain. And those packages sold immediately. There was just no question when those packages were sold that Canada was going to win.
And being a hockey puck, I wanted to be there. So I applied and got a little late, so I only got one seat, but I was lucky and it was terrific.
The European tradition is you watch the game almost as if you're at the theater. And then all of a sudden you have the Canadian section. It's just a riot of color and Canadian flags.
This is a party atmosphere for us. It's a hockey game, but it's a party atmosphere. I mean, we were loud.
Those fans were supportive of us the whole time. Everybody that came there, like 3,000 people, wow, they never give up. I mean, they were like pumping us, but it was amazing.
I can still hear them chanting, and one of the chants was,
Da, da, Canada.
Yet, Soviet.
Da, da, Canada, yet, Soviet.
You know, you got these 3,000 crazy Canadians and 10, 12,000 Russian people just sitting there wondering what the heck is going on.
Now, the fact that most of them were hammered has got nothing to do with it, but that I remember that so distinctly. They were there, and they had this trumpeter that used to go to the Montreal games, and he would blow this trumpet. Well, he came over there, and the Russians tried to take this from him.
The Soviet police were trying to track down who had the trumpet, and they would just pass it from person to person to person.
Well, these Canadians were going nuts, you know, yeah. I mean, the poor guys in the Army didn't know whether to shoot them or what to do.
And to that end, two gorgeous French-Canadian girls went up and they spun the medals around. The fellow sitting there, if you can imagine, with his bayonet, and he didn't know what to do. He just stood there. And then as we passed, you could see he had a great big smile on his face.
Perhaps even more important to Team Canada was the love and support it was now getting from back home.
We started getting telegrams from across Canada, different towns, you know, 400 or 500 names on a telegram wishing us luck. And the whole dressing rooms were filled with thousands upon thousands of names.
I believe they had something like 154,000 telegrams. And Canada pulled together.
The country of Canada basically came to a halt on the day of the game. People either stayed home from work or in their workplace, they were allowed to watch it. Business came to a halt. Telephones fell silent. It was an amazing moment. You'd have to say it was a unifying moment in the sense that Canadians everywhere across the country were all doing the same thing. The drama was so amazing. I mean, Foster Hewitt, the play-by-play commentator, said,
"You have been writing the script. Couldn't have produced a more dramatic and exciting final. Tonight we are making hockey history."
It's no longer an 8-game series. It's down to a 1-game series.
Here in the Moscow arena here is tense as we get ready for this 8th and final game of the series.
But even before the puck dropped on the deciding game, there was a dispute involving the referees.
Slovakia and Joe Kampala of West Germany are the two referees, and they nearly caused a riot in the
Kampala was of particular concern to Team Canada. In Game 6, he had called a lopsided amount of penalties on the Canadians. And when Game 8 started, the questionable calls returned early and often.
There'll be a penalty, and Peter Mahovlich raped himself on him, and there's going to be a penalty there, and Canada will play 2 men short.
It was incredible. You know, in the first 4 or 5 minutes of the game, all of a sudden we're from bing, and then we get another one, bing.
Far-sided shot is stopped, and drive, they play it in, they score!
After the Soviet Union scored on a power play, another penalty was called on the normally mild-mannered J.P. Parisi.
They wind up in our zone, and I hit them.
He's knocked over by...
Whoop. So now it puts us 5-on-3.
And just one penalty after another in this game.
But not only that, the guy comes to me and he says, 2 minutes interference. So I says, that's not interference. You've got 10. Snapped. I snapped.
Parise tempted to swing his stick at the referee and is totally incensed.
I'm kicked out of the game.
A lot of people lost their temper over that, including myself.
Harry Sindon threw a chair out on the ice. So it's a very severe penalty to Team Canada. Cleared on the right side to Ellis, right in front of the net for Phil Eспозито.
After the ugly incident, Team Canada settled down and picked up the pace.
Canadians having a chance. Here's a shot, right on. Quick check. They bang it in. Phil Eспозito. They're closing in. Rattel to Park, right in. He scores! Park from Rattel.
But so did the Soviets.
So here's another shot. He scores! Canada
Towards the end of the second period, the Soviets scored twice to take a commanding 2-goal lead. After 27 days, 7 games, and 2 periods, Team Canada was 20 minutes away from the unthinkable. With one final period remaining and their heritage on the line, the boys from Canada were playing their game for their country.
We're not going to lose. We are not going to lose this game. Nobody in this room better quit. I wasn't the only one saying it. Other guys were standing up saying the same thing.
And I think that's one of the things that makes us uniquely Canadian. The Russians couldn't compete with the Canadians when it came to spirit and heart.
We're not going to lose. No way we're going to lose. Let's go out there and kick the hell out of them, you know? I just trusted myself so much that I wasn't going to let them beat us. I was like a man possessed.
And there was one point where Ken Dryden was completely out of the play. Esposito rushed into the net.
Esposito slid in front of the net to cover that loose puck.
And the Soviets just shook their heads. They said, this guy is unbelievable. He's everywhere.
Thanks to Phil Esposito, just 2 minutes into the third period, Team Canada got 1 goal closer.
Corner is bumped back of the net, centered it.
It deflected. I pounded it down, and I swung, and I missed it. Tretьяк went down, and the second one, I just went boom.
But Esposito wasn't done. With just 8 minutes remaining, he imposed his will yet again.
Oh, right in front of the net. Esposito banged that. Here's another shot by QIWI. He scores! Canada has tied it up.
There was no disputing the obvious goal. But when the red light didn't go on, an enraged Alan Eagleson feared the Soviets were intent on changing history.
He was starting to run down to the goal judge to see why he didn't turn the light on, and he was grabbed by the guards.
The police were trying to throw Eagleson out. Now we see a fight break.
So I skated over, and I hopped over the boards.
Canadian team came over there to help out.
And not sure, but I think I raised my stick at these guards that had machine guns, which wasn't very bright. So then we got Alan to come to our bench, and of course he walked across the ice. He wasn't too gracious about that, as he gave everybody the finger.
When that rumpus started, of whatever it was, nobody knows. Both teams have given everything. It's been one of the best games I think they've ever played. 5 all time, 1:02 left in the game. Canadian team went into a huddle there, which seemed to be a little unusual.
With the game reaching its final minute, and the Soviets seemingly playing for a tie that they claimed would allow them to win the series on total goals, Team Canada's unlikely hero needed to score once more to become a Canadian legend.
I stood up and I started yelling at Peter Mohavlis to come off the ice. I had never done that before in my life. I never did it again. And I jumped over the boards, and the defenseman stuck a stick out. I tripped on it, fell into the boards. I got up so quickly, Phil just whacked the puck at Tretьяк, and it was right there.
QIWI has it on that wing. Here's a shot. Henderson made a wild stab for it, fell. Here's another shot. Right by the score. Henderson has scored for Canada. Henderson right in front of the net. And the fans of the team are going wild. Henderson right in front of the Soviet goal with 34 seconds left in the game. An absolute mob scene over Paul Henderson, as there should be, and this crowd is going wild.
Paul Henderson got that puck from God himself. This had to be a script written by someone above. We went nuts.
Ecstatic, but there's also a real relief.
It's the closest I've ever come to kissing a man. Really kissing a man. I loved that man that moment. I did.
Shot by Gusev. Tried and played it back to the goal. The game is over, and Canada have won the series. They defeated the Soviets 6-5 in a thrilling, hard-fought tussle here.
Of course, right after the game, there was disappointment. We lost. We are athletes, and it's a bitter pill to swallow. But then the emotions calmed down, and it was time for a sober analysis. We realized this was a good series, and the conclusion was that we played worthy hockey.
And I must say, Foster, is that both these teams played so well, it's a shame that anybody had to lose.
By the time it ended, I was just empty inside. But the disappointment from losing was less than the sheer exhaustion I felt. It was hard to even comprehend what happened. So, yes, I have the disappointment, but pride too. We showed the world that we could play beautiful hockey. So I'd say it's 50-50. These games should be respected. Two amazing teams.
There is nothing better and more rewarding than representing your country. And when you're standing at the blue line and they're playing your national anthem, there is nothing like it.
I think all of us have created a bond that I'm awfully proud of, and that I share this with all of Canada. Like every time I go back there, people still remember it.
And this is the moment that everybody has been waiting for. Fil Espozito, a tired bunch of hockey players, a very weary gang of guys, and
жизни спортсмена.
Well, with Henderson, it's probably just something that happens in the life of an athlete. And it was just very unfortunate for our team. He scored all the big goals. I have to give him credit. And maybe some reverence. It is why he is worshipped in Canada to this day. Even though, as people say, he wasn't really a star on his team. But because of this series, he's become the #1 star.
Americans tend to remember where they were and what they were wearing and who they were with the day Kennedy was shot. Canadians tend to remember where they were and what they were wearing and who they were talking to and who they were with the moment that Paul Henderson scored that goal. That's how important it is in our history.
They don't ask me questions initially. They tell me what they were doing and where they were.
Here's a shot. Henderson made a wild stab, work, fell. Here's another shot. Right by the score. Henderson has scored for Canada.
And even kids that were not even born, they do projects at school, and I get phone calls all the time. There was a 15-year-old kid called me a little while ago, and he says, my dad was telling me about the series, and he said he got so emotional, my dad started to cry. He said, Paul, I've never seen my dad cry in his life.